Hi there, YouTube. Welcome to Stratosphere Studio. It's Monday night. It's the first day of December in the year of our Lord 2025, which is freaking almost unbelievable. But there it is. I don't know if you guys are experiencing this. Some of our younger viewers, we've probably got two or three, um, won't experience this for many years. I think it probably won't start to hit you until you're probably in your 50s, maybe. I think 50 seems about right. But for those of you who are in your 50s or beyond, you may have noticed this kind of a disturbing trend, and that is uh, you see movie stars that you grew up with, or TV stars. I guess young people today not really going to grow up with movie or TV stars. But here's my point. You see people that you grew up with, and all of a sudden you see like a picture of them at a like a red carpet event or something like that, and you think, wow, they look really old, and it's not really noticeable with like older movie stars or TV stars because they were always older than you or considerably older than you. Comes a point though when there's somebody who's about your age, roughly your age, and you look at them and you think, man, that's them today. It's like, um, okay, and then which isn't in itself so much a problem, but then you have to kind of apply that logic, and you realize, well, if they're that much older, then maybe like, I don't know, maybe it's just me. Um, there's a lot of AI stuff going around now. I guess this is a form of AI slop, but I find it, well, there's just too much of it. But overall, it's kind of interesting where you'll see somebody from you'll see like a picture of somebody, a video of somebody like from the 1980s or 90s or something, and then you'll see them today. I just saw one earlier today. It was the Lord of the Rings cast, which was shot in the late 1990s and 2000, the year 2000, and first movie was released in 2001. So here's here's Frodo when Lord of the Rings was made, and here's Frodo today, and it's like, good Lord. And by the way, I'm 66, but Ian McClellan was 62 when he played Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. Anyway, my point is, you see all these people just getting older and older and older, and it's like, what? That can't be. No, that can't be right. Here's a picture of Charlize Theron. It's, yeah, that's Charlize Theron. It's like, no, it's not Charlize Theron. Charlize, that's what you remember Charlize Theron to look like. Charlize Theron looks like this now, and it's like, oh my God. Uh, yeah, YZF Hornet says it's worse when you see somebody about 7 or 12 years younger than you, and then they look older than you. Uh, God, and coaches, have you ever seen anybody in their Teslas driving themselves, fully self-driving Teslas, driving on freeways and parking autonomously? Burt Rutan has a Tesla. It keeps updating the software, and unfortunately, last year I had to go up there. I didn't have to. I love going up there. I went up there 4 times, and and he kept updating the software. So he he showed me the full self-driving. I just couldn't believe it, and that's a year ago. It's absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. Um, and F and Geek AZ says, if I recall correctly, Dick Van Dyke is still kicking at nearly 100. He is, as of this recording. I think he actually is 100 now. And, he's got that beard, which I don't think is helping him much. But he's one of my favorite people in the world, Dick Van Dyke. I just adore the man. I just love him. Um, Growing up, to me, he was just, he's just a great guy, He just seemed like such a nice guy. I saw him in Mary Poppins when I was little, and then I saw him in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, written by Ian Fleming, a friend of my grandfather's, who I might add, as I've mentioned only a few hundred times on this show, uh, named the inventor and overall oddball in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, named him Caractacus Potts. Um, that's my mother's maiden name. My grandfather, Alfred Potts, was close to Ian Fleming and was in Royal Naval Intelligence. And I just keep looking for these influences, and I believe they're there. But one of the reasons that Ian Fleming did it was because he liked the idea of calling him crackpots. So, there you go. Sven says Dick was approached to replace Sean Connery as the next Bond. No, the next Bond is going to be Black Man. Um, and okay, we'll see how that works out. Um, because James Bond isn't a black man. He's not. He's not. Captain America isn't either. Um, Gotham Coach said, "Did you see Jim Carrey will star in the real life version of the Jetsons movie?" No, don't do that. Don't do that. Uh, anyway, for a minute, I'd like to talk about this idea of Sean Connery in the next James Bond movie. I don't think a whole I don't think it could carry a movie, and I don't think Sean Connery would work in the present day. But more to the point, we use a we are really at the point where you could do another James Bond movie set in 1967, say. Wasn't Goldfinger 64? I want to say something like that. Um, and that might be interesting. Although I don't know if it would hold my interest for a whole hour. I don't know. I'd have to see. I'll tell you what I did. There's just so many ideas that just pop into my head. I told you I'd like to do Captain Kirk as the commandant of Starfleet Academy. Yes, Connery's been gone for a long time. I wanted to do Starfleet Academy, but there are some problems with uploading a likeness and getting the lip sync to work. I didn't push it real hard. I got a lot of things to do, obviously, but that would be kind of fun. I'll tell you, I know I'm not making any promises because I know I overpromise and underdeliver. That's kind of my MO, which is not a good MO. But this is what happens when you're just an idea factory and you just jump. Oh, look how shiny! There's a squirrel. But what would be fun when I thought about this technology, I had this thought about a week ago. I would like to do like a 5-minute short. It's certainly within our means technologically. Whether or not we can get lip sync with, because for me, the faces would have to be perfect, and I know how to make them perfect. We've seen these Star Trek, communist Star Trek things where they look kind of like Spock and kind of like this kind of. It would have to be absolutely perfect, but I believe I could do that. Anyway, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to do a scene where you see McCoy, and this is their age is just exactly as they looked in the first season of the original series, and you see McCoy, and he's at his apartment or something like that, and his his beeper, his communicator goes off, his wall communicator or whatever. They're not on the Enterprise, and it's something like beep beep, beep beep. McCoy goes over there and he he says, pushes it, and he says, and you hear Kirk's voice. You say, Bones, I gotta meet you down at the the Rusty Dolphin, some club, right? They're in San Francisco. You set the scene so it's San Francisco. It's San Francisco. It's Starfleet Academy era in the original series, and it's late at night. And McCoy says, "Ah, Jim, come on, it's pushing 11. They're not even going to be open." He says, "I'll make them open. I just be there in 15 minutes." That kind of thing, right? So then you see these two guys in the bar. Kirk is sitting there. He's in his Starfleet uniform in a dark corner of the bar. McCoy comes in, sits down, and says, McCoy says, "Well, this better be good, Jim." And McCoy sits down, and Kirk leans forward, and he says, "They gave it to me, Bones." And Bones says, "They gave what to you?" And he says, "They gave me the Enterprise." And McCoy goes, "Well, imagine my surprise." And Kirk is just like on fire about this. And McCoy says something like to the effect of, "Who's your exec?" And Kirk says, "Don't know much about him. He's a Vulcan." And McCoy goes, "Oh, a Vulcan." And Kirk says, "Yeah, he's expected back in 2 days. He's on his way back from Vulcan. He's doing one of those mystical things like that." And McCoy basically says, "So you've got a computer running the ship when you're off, and I've heard he's a good guy." He's like, "I'll believe it when I see it," this kind of thing. It just basically goes through the whole thing. And I had a couple of pieces of dialogue kind of worked out that I don't have there yet, but I just thought that would be a great moment in Star Trek history that has not been covered, and that would be the moment that Kirk tells McCoy that they've been given the Enterprise, and that he basically says, "Yeah, Pike's off. Pike's been bumped up. Pike's been bumped up to Admiral," and I went in there and they gave it to me. And then you could have, which would be kind of a neat sort of a flash forward, where you could have that line where McCoy says exactly what Scotty says in the first Star Trek movie. He says, "Give it to you, Jim? I don't think they gave it to you." And Kirk's just happy as all, and he's talking about the 5-year mission, and he's trying to get McCoy to go, and McCoy doesn't want to go, and he says, "Bones, I don't have anybody else. I don't have any other friends. I need somebody I can talk to. This Vulcan guy's probably going to be, a complete, zero as far as confidant goes, and just play with it. Just kind of have fun with it, and it'd be like a 3-4 minute scene. It'd just be fun to do, which brings me to an interesting subject, and that is what we talked about before for the colonies, which is this idea that we would open source the whole thing, that we would open source the development of all the stuff that showed up inside the shows that we produce. And I think there's an awful lot to be said for fan fiction. I think certainly without question. Well, I mean, Star Trek Continues is a great example. Star Trek Continues, there were episodes in there I wasn't that fond of, but there were probably 2 or 3 episodes, certainly 1 or 2 episodes of Star Trek Continues that were far better than the worst episodes of Star Trek, the original series. So I really want this thing to just completely penetrate the pop culture, and the way to do that is to make it open source. So I had an idea that, we've talked about this before, but it just occurred to me, and what I thought is, Roadrider says, will we get bored quickly with choppy AI videos? I don't know. They're not going to be AI videos for long. They're going to start looking really indistinguishable. Most of the stuff out there now. FN Geek solves the eternal question. It depends on the writers. That's exactly it. It depends on the writers. All this fan fiction. The reason that there was Star Trek Farragut, and then there were Star Trek Intrepid, and they've been hundreds. There've been hundreds of individual Star Trek and Star Wars, probably thousands when you put the two together, fan fiction, and some of it is good, most of it isn't, and it's because of the writers and the casting and how much care and how much talent goes into it. So I've seen original series fan fiction that is just horrific. It just everybody in Starfleet is 400 pounds, and the colors on the uniforms are just like, they're just not right, and they're sitting in a set with a TV set for that's kind of garbage. But then again, you go to the other end of the extreme and you get Star Trek Continues, which is fantastic. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to have as much fan fiction done as possible, and I'll get to making the assets available in a minute. Axanar, great example, Dave Big Butte. Axanar is epic, much better than certainly better than anything, dare I say it, after Next Generation, and much better than anything that's post Discovery, infinitely better than that. So it, like I said, depends. So that creates a problem, right? You want to encourage fan fiction, and you want anybody who you need a writer's Bible, says Airtechie, absolutely right. Anybody who makes a contribution that comes through the colonies and ends up in one of the colonies' productions, that's automatically canonical. But what do you do about fan fiction? And I thought, okay, so I'll tell you who I don't want to be. I don't want to be the guy who's sending out, and I won't be the guy who's sending out cease and desist, take it down videos to people that are making colonies fan fiction. But at the other extreme, I also don't want anything to be automatically canonical if it's crap. And I thought, how do I solve this problem? And I realized for stuff that's produced outside of the colonies organization, right? And I thought about this for a while, and I thought, you know what we could do? We could issue. I wrote it down. I just thought it was cool. We could issue a certificate of canon. And here's how it would work. First pass off the top of my head. Anything we see that's the colonies that we didn't produce, we take a look at it. If it looks like it belongs there and is and adds something interesting, then people either approach us before this or they approach us after it. But whatever, or we approach them. Here's all I'm saying. If it's something that really looks good, we generate a number, right? Just one of those random number generators, and it's a certificate of canon. And in order to display it, they'd have to just put it in just a little tiny bit of corner, right? Just a little bit of the corner. They probably wouldn't even need to keep it up the whole way. But you could just basically say, Certificate of Canon number 6TR294765, right? And that would mean that it's canonical as far as the colonies is known. Trinity Water says it's known as an imprimatur. Very good. Now, can somebody fake that? Absolutely. Somebody could produce a piece of trash and then put a little lower third up there that says Certificate of Canon, and then they would have the number or whatever. But on the colony's website, there would be a little tiny thing that would say canonical entries, and we'd list them, and we'd link to them. We want people to promote that. And if it turns out that somebody is non-canonical, then they don't show up on our canonical page. Astrocanonical. I just thought that was a cool idea. So seemed like it solved a bunch of problems. Then I ran into a conflict between my my generous brain and my newly developed late in life money making brain, because I was thinking of making assets available, and I kind of want to do that. For example, for people who work with Blender, I'd like to make like a lot of the ships available. And then my other brain kicked in and said, Star Citizen has raised $900 million, and the way they did it was by selling spaceships for real money. Some of those ships are $2,000 US, $1,800 US dollars. I don't know what the current price of an Idris is. Somebody could probably find out. I think that's the most expensive ship they've got. That's a full-on, multi-crew frigate. And in order to fly one in the game, which I think they're still limited to 50 players on any one server, although they deserve credit, they opened up a third system now, so they're slowly getting there. But what has made $900 million for Star Citizen is the Starship owner's experience. And when I was playing Star Citizen, I stopped, I want to say in 2017, I think, something. That sounds about right, 17 or 18. By that time, I'd owned, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 of these ships, and it was really cool, and they all look cool on the inside, and people are just paying real money. In many cases, they were paying real money just for a JPEG of a ship that wasn't even released yet. And that's where they made most of their $900 million, is by selling spaceships. So they built the universe in one star system. This is for the huge majority of Star Citizen, which is 13 years old now. And they sell ships, and when you buy one, it appears in your hangar in the game, and you get to fly it around, and everybody just loves it. Yes, a World of Tanks and War Thunder do something similar. World of Warships has you can buy like you get a certain number of ships to play for free, and this is that's how that particular system works, right? You play for free, and then you get hooked on the game, and then you decide you want to buy some add-ons and that kind of thing. And I think that's probably a pretty good model, because if you're talking about a game for the colonies, you could make a number of put 6 or 7 stock ships out there. And then if you wanted, upgrades or premieres, you could charge for that. That seems like a good compromise. and then you could release those models as FBX files, and people could then make their own fan fiction in Blender, and that gets back to the certificate of canon thing. So this kind of thing is not just good marketing. It's also, it's just the way you get people really invested, you know. And I really like all of these ideas. So so I think what I'll probably do is that. Now I was thinking about the colonies thing as a game, and it's actually, compared to most video games, it's an astonishingly simple game. You could basically take Space Engine. In fact, we get this thing rolling. I want to talk to the guys at Space Engine and see about licensing Space Engine so that you're constantly getting updates, so that all of the systems that exist in the show also exist in this Space Engine game, and you can do the starship runs and down the star lines, and the planet, we would actually provide our own map so that the planets looked exactly like or very close to the ones that we use in the show. So that would basically be the chassis of the game, the ability to go from one place to another. And if you can go from one place to another, then you can do two things that are not terribly difficult in terms of what modern video games have to do, modern computer games. Modern computer games, you know, you need all these NPC interactions. I think a minimal viable product for the game would be a version 1 release that would allow you to travel throughout the universe as it exists in the colonies, and it would be really cool because it would allow people to go places that haven't been covered in the show yet. So that's number one. The second thing that you would need is you would need a basic economic system. In other words, you would need the ability to buy a bunch of different kinds of, you have a whole inventory of things that you can buy in location B, location A, travel to location B, and sell them at a profit. So you would have a basic economic trade system. And I think the third thing you need is a combat system. But the combat system, in terms of what computer game programming requires, is actually really simple, because we don't have anything like the graphics card demands that something like Star Citizen or these other things have. We don't have to be having 19 different ships that are all fully rezzed up in a dogfight, tracers and the paths of all those bullets and asteroids and all that stuff. It's actually very simple, because you've got much longer engagement distances. Airtechie says interstellar trade is hard to justify as hard sci-fi. Now, first of all, you've got interplanetary trade. If you've got these colonies everywhere, they have to be supplied, and somebody has to supply them. And certainly, you got to move something from one place to another. So that seems to be relatively simple. And then when you've got these Stargate lines, you essentially, an interplanetary ship becomes an interstellar ship, but the cost of traveling down the gate has got to be really, really expensive. It's got to be really, really expensive to go from one system to another, because they only fired these things off on a relatively infrequent basis and all the rest of it. So you would just you just do what you always do, which is you balance the game so that you can start off small and just shuttle supply missions out to various moons and so on, and then when you've got enough money, you can buy a place in the next particular Stargate firing sequence, because they're not open all the time. These things only fire a couple times a year or maybe a couple times a month for a busy route. And it takes a lot of energy to fire that Stargate line, and so the people who are using that Stargate line have to pay. And the big players can afford it, and the little players have to really reach. And what would be, and the Stargates, it seems to me, would charge by the exterior volume of the ship, because you're funneling all of these ships into one place. It just visually looks so cool to have, 7 or 8 or 9 of these things, like almost touching, all under computer control, obviously. And then when they get together, it's actually, hang on, it's actually not mass as far as they're concerned, because mass doesn't really have anything to do with it. What they're really charging is, you are displacing mass, yes, but you are displacing what the energy cost is to well, I almost said bend space, but in our case is to align the quantum states between these two gates, and that takes a large amount of energy. George says it's the largest cross-section area. It's the largest square box volume. In other words, if you've got a really, really big ship and you can't get anything in there between it, then it's taking up almost all of the available space in the gates. So that's a part of the charge. And another part of the charge would be the length of the ship, because the length of the ship will determine the duration of the gate. And we're talking about milliseconds. And we can work all this out. I'm not trying to say I got all this, completely thought out. It's fun to spitball this thing. But basically, that would be how it worked. Eric says, I imagine the distance should also count for cart. How many gates are you going to go through? Look, I've said before, I think the limit of the gate should be something like maybe 1.2 light years, some number that gets smaller, slightly smaller over time as the technology gets a little bit more efficient. So to go from here to Alpha Centauri, that might be 1 gate, 2 gate, 3 gates, and you're there. Longer ones would be 7, something like that. What's the currency? I don't know yet. But the width of the ship determines whether any other ships can get through that limited gate, and the length of the ship means that the gate has to be open for a few milliseconds longer, and there's got to be a upper limit on that. I mean, you can't keep it open forever. It's still got to be just a few milliseconds. Things got to really be moving. So Kirk's Bamboo Bazooka says it doesn't have to be by mass. I can be convinced of it, but not the way I see it. It seems to me that you're opening that hole, and it doesn't matter whether you throw a baseball through there. So, again, game balance. You could have these giant, and we will canonically have these giant cargo corporations and something the equivalent of ocean liners and that kind of thing for people to go from one location to another and down the gates and so on. And a small little mom and pop ship take up very little volume. This wouldn't be something. This still would have to be something to be planned weeks, if not months in advance. But you could basically say, look, we could squeeze you in on this, and we'll charge you a volume prorated percentage of that. And anyway, you get the idea. So there's that, and then there's the space combat, which is extremely low demand on the video cards compared to what modern games use. Obviously, you'd have to be able to switch from interior to exterior. You should absolutely have to be able to fly around the outside of your ship, zoom in and zoom out. You should be able to customize the ships if you want to add a centrifuge, if you want to add cargo things. You should be able to build that ship out. There should be stock ships and so on 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 and so on. And then you'd have to be realistic canonically about things like weapons, cargo ships. Ocean liners don't have anti-aircraft guns on them. And so, you get the idea. I'm just laying these things out there just to, mostly just to clear the cache. Now, I did see something that I'm going to play for you guys that really impressed me. It's from a YouTube channel. What was the name of the channel? It's SAD. I thought it was Search and Destroy. It's a guy who does, and there are a few guys out there doing relatively realistic space combat, and the graphics are not great. I think we could improve on those enormously. But he put out something, I want to say 4 or 5 days ago, maybe a week ago, that impressed me so much that I tried to contact him using the contact information on YouTube. I don't know if I'll hear back from him. I don't know if he'll get it. But this is actually, I saw this and I thought, this is the feel I want. you know, this is the feel I want. I don't want a couple of, of shaved head, women sitting on consoles, saying, looks like we're under attack, or we need to bring down that ship, or something like that. I want it to sound real. Now, this is probably overly technically complicated. Probably pare this down a little bit, but this is the feel. This is the feel. Don Vickery says, "What happens if a ship half misses the travel window?" I think the first half of the ship comes through at the other gate, and the second half of the ship just continues through the gate. Maybe the second half of the ship just disintegrates. That wouldn't disintegrate. The field's either on or it's off. So first half of the ship goes, and the second half of the ship doesn't, and make for interesting visuals. Obviously, you could put a little debris in there. In fact, I had thought about that. That seems like something we have to do at least once, because it's kind of horrifying. But anyway, I've given a lot of thought to these gates and how to supply them and how to keep them going. And essentially, I'm really big on this quantum information holography as a. So when Star Trek came out in 1966, it was using terminology of things that were cutting edge science fiction, cutting edge physics, really. Warp drive, the idea of warping space time in the original. I just got to wait for this important message. Hang on one second. Good. Okay, done. So you heard things like warp drive. You heard phasers, which I think in the cage. Didn't they use lasers? And Roddenberry decided, it sounds a little bit like we should be further along than lasers. And phasers is just a great word. It's a perfect word. You had things like matter-antimatter reaction, and all of these things are were cutting edge astrophysics in 1966, and they're still being used today. Wormholes are still being used today. These aren't wormholes that we're traveling down. That's all. Here, let me make this a little clearer. Star Trek, and to a much lesser degree Star Wars, because Star Wars doesn't really much. Star Wars is science fantasy, but Star Trek was using the most advanced concepts in relativistic physics that they could use, and they did a great job of it. The Enterprise travels through a warp bubble, and warp factor 1 is the speed of light. Well, at least it should be. I've heard argument about this. Warp factor 2 should be the speed of light squared. Warp factor 3 should be the speed of light cubed, and so on. So all of that relativistic stuff is great. And I thought, well, I'm used to thinking, listen, we're going to bend space, we're going to do this. And it's like, we need to update this, and this needs to be. It needs to sound like quantum science rather than relativistic science. And so we'll be talking about things like entanglement, and we'll be talking about things like electron field densities, and all of that quantum spin and all that stuff. But quantum information holography is a really more of an idea than anything, and it's got some things going for it, and there are some detractors, but the idea is that the entire universe is a projection from a massive black hole, and that all of this information is spread throughout the universe using entanglement. And so, as of current date, my general overall theory of the gates is that that at location A, let's just say it's 2 gates, make it simple, okay? Location A, you take a volume of let's just say some kind of ionized gas. You take a volume of this at gate A, and during the initial thing, you have to do this slower than light. In slower than light, to set up gate B, you got to travel there, and it takes 8 years or 12 years or whatever. They've taken some of that gas, the physical gas, they've taken it with them, so that these two reservoirs of gas, of ionized gas, have entangled particles. They're entangled with each other. And then when the actual gates fire, this gas is injected into a magnetic containment area. And then it's hit with really super powerful lasers that are hit. I almost thought about, and it might be this, because this is an engineering problem. Maybe a laser has to hit like virtually every one of these atoms and get them all with the same spin and the same quantum state. And so what happens inside this magnetic containment field at A and inside the magnetic containment field at B is that the ionized gas containing those magnetic fields are energized in such a way so that all of the quantum probabilities just descend and cascade down, so that these two areas have fully entangled volume. Just the gas inside it is fully entangled with each other, which means that the space becomes identical. As far as the universe is concerned, it's the same space. Airtechie says lasers can do it, but it's an engineering nightmare. Well, we got 250 years to perfect the engineering. Maybe it's lasers, maybe it's something else. But the general idea would be that at that instant, which lasts maybe 20 milliseconds, the energy pumps this field to the point where all of the qubits, that's the word I was trying to remember, all of the qubits inside of this thing become aligned with each other, and during that instant where the quantum probability of every one of those particles becomes 100%, then those two places in space exist not next to each other. It becomes the same area. It's the same space. And so you go through there and all the qubits are aligned, and then poof. And then maybe the gas evaporates, not a lot of gas, the gas evaporates into space, and you got to charge the thing again and put more gas in there. Now, once you got the gates open, you can be taking gas back and forth, and I got all that sort of supply thing hooked up. Or maybe you just funnel the gas back into the whatever using magnetics and so on. I think magnetic field technology is going to be a big part of this thing. But terms like qubits, terms like alignment, terms like entanglement, all of the technological terms in the colonies has to sound like post-relativistic science. We can't have we got to resist the temptation to do things like warp space, bend space, wormholes, warps, tunneling. Nope, that's 20th century science. We're going to be doing 21st century science in the 23rd century, and it's just got to feel different. It's got to look different. All of these things have to be completely different. And the visual is, how many times have you seen a ship go through a Stargate and either it enters a wormhole and goes, just majestically sails through the wormhole, or it just materializes out of the gate, comes out nice and slow, and all the rest of this stuff. If you're like at gate control and you're watching this thing, behind you is a cluster of 7 or 8 ships that are practically touching. They're all obviously under computer control, AI computer control. And these things are moving really, 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 really fast. Really fast. So all you see is just like a white speck and it's gone. And when it gets to the gate, there's this instantaneous flash of light like a strobe, and they're not there anymore. You see where they should be coming out, they're just not there. Just a flash of light. Epic Geek says, anyone else lost? Yeah, I'm lost too. I'm just throwing jargon around, but I have given this some thought. So anyway, let me play this thing for you that this guy did. Again, I should have his website. I'll throw a link. I'll throw a link on the YouTube thing, but hang on. But this briefing, if I don't write it down, it doesn't happen. This briefing is not only really good in terms of the physics, it's also really, really good in terms of the military jargon. It sounds to me like a military briefing. So instead of, the ship's making a getaway and we've got to stop it, and let's, get on the, engage the warp drive. And by the way, of all the things that I want to accomplish, I think more than any single one thing that I want to accomplish is this idea of not just dogfighting starships. That's relatively new. The idea that you miss, fire photon torpedoes, pew, pew, pew. Missed, Captain. Oh, what was the range? Sir, it was almost 2 miles. Well, please. And the same thing is true in Star Citizen. You've got these massive ships that are shooting tiny little lasers, and little sparkles on the shield. It's like little sparkles on the shield. It's like, no. You hit the ship, you kill the ship. 8 out of 10 times a hit is a kill. It's done. That's much more dramatic. And this business of sending these warships out there, Star Wars is terrible with this. The idea that you're sending these starships out there, these huge destroyers, and their weapon is little lasers. No, it's a spinal gun. It's some kind of, it's either a mass accelerator or it's a particle accelerator, something. And it's just designed, you hit it, you kill it. Which means that all thing becomes about detection, countermeasures, evasion, all that other jazz. But as a briefing, just listen to this. Again, this is not me. This is a guy. So I'm going to go to the Stratosphere screen. I'm going to drag him in, and then I'll come back. Okay? So hang on. So here we go. Don't go away. So we're going to go to Stratosphere screen, and then we'll play this thing. It's about 4 minutes, and then we'll come back and tell me what you think. Okay. So you go. Do it.
All right, gentlemen, sorry for the short notice. This one's going to be quick, and we're already on the clock, so get out your pens and pay attention. This is your mission vehicle, the Industrial Intent, a Polaris Freightworks long-haul heavy. She went dark while sitting in Ganymede 1-2 resonant parking orbit. You can see her waiting for transfer here, but the Intent missed its Earth-Moon transfer slot. Then telemetry from iTask shows reorientation for a completely different maneuver. There's no bounce at all on the carrier signal to Jupiter Traffic Control, and since it changed attitude, the CDH isn't answering inbound calls for override. Fleet's assessment is that external comm hooks are dead and the MV is operating on a pre-programmed timer. Worst case assumption, DSAM hijacking. Fleet, iTask, and an independent think tank at NASC all ran the numbers. If this is DSAM's, smart money is the MV's going to Saturn. It's got the Delta V, and its new alignment matches lowering Perijove for a powered Ganymede assist into Trans-Saturn injection. Assuming the most efficient execution, the MV burns in 60 hours. That's our T0. JCOM's plan? Intercept the MV during descent when it's committed and post in cold. That way we're sure the NSWR isn't going to pop off for any arbitrary maneuvers, so we can pull the flight recorder and figure out how this happened. Simultaneously kill thrust capability without damaging the ship. Hydra waits until T0, confirms it's going off, and executes a high impulse burn from Europa the moment MV starts moving. Complicating things, we've got DSAM combat forms staging in medium IO orbit. Our best bet says they're going to match our step off, but faster, pushing a hard burn at T0, letting them harass us throughout transit, which is probably going to be really hairy at about half a light second out, even with the lower relative velocities. Bricks are going to be shadowing us trying to chip away at our Delta V. If that's the case, they'll also be gunning for the MV, just delayed enough to catch us during terminal guidance and leave them with a prime solution to blow it all to hell if they don't like how close we get. Look around the room. Strike Group Hydra's composition is everybody we could pull a rope on short notice. Alpha, our only VBSS-capable asset in theater, is working the assault. You're gonna board, pull the black box, and render safe those fuel feeds. That'll head off any ignition, and if we have to shoot the disable, it'll make any precision engagement safer. Make sure your people are wired tight because we don't know what's on board. Bravo's on security and fires, protecting Alpha and the mission vehicle, screening the approach, and defeating DSAM combat forms on contact. If we don't pop the DSAMs during approach, it's going to be a slugging match at the MV. Backstop's putting up cover for Dragoons, and you're going to need to keep your guns clear for intercept on anything flying at the strike group. Charlie, you're supporting Bravo, but your primary contingency on any sign of NSWR ignition, you're to execute a precision DEW strike on the MDC-2 compartments after Alpha bugs out. Delta, you're providing telemetry, nav sync, and conventional jamming support. This is critical. Maintain MCON. I want zero cyber intrusion until JCOM clears isolation. Threat Assessment Group thinks the DSAM reverse engineered some of your E-War package after Methone, and that's what got the MV. Malice stays on the leash for this one until we figure out how this happened. Bottom line, we board that ship, secure the black box, and prevent catastrophic NSWR ignition near Ganymede. One more time for the folks in the back. That would spell catastrophic irradiation of civilian traffic, industrial platforms, orbital stations, and half the moon's surface. If we can't board it, we disable it. If we can't disable it safely, Charlie destroys its brain before it lights off. We do not let DSAM take a freighter full of construction resources to Saturn. Get your gear checked, get your people briefed. I want loadout verification, ammo requests, ROE back briefs, and MCON posture set at T-minus 48. Any questions?
That was freaking epic. That was just epic, and that guy was awesome. That guy knows his physics, he knows his tactics, and he knows his military. That sounded exactly to me like a serious military mission briefing, and I contacted him, and I'm going to want to hire that guy. I thought that was just phenomenal, and instead of just like we're out there, and oh look, here's an enemy spaceship decloaking. It's how far away is it? It looks like it's about 150 yards off the bow, Captain. Well, then raise shields and prepare to open fire. Like boom. Yeah, let me get you the link. Hang on, that's going to take me just a second. Hold on one second. That won't take long. I can do the link, and I'll put the link ready to go. It's entirely his work, and I saw it, and I just thought, man, I gotta talk to this guy. Here's the. I'll tell you what. I'll throw you the link to his station, to his channel rather. I think he's working on a game called SAD Frontier, Sad Frontier, and it'd be great to collaborate with him. I hope he does, because to me that sounded absolutely perfect. So hang on, here comes the link. Now, there's a couple things interesting about this to me from a writer's point of view, from an entertainment point of view. Here comes the link. There you go. First of all, that's really jargon heavy, and one of the things that I've talked about from the very beginning, long since I talked about making the colonies, like I was serious about getting it done, was that one of my favorite scenes in movies ever is in Crimson Tide, where they do the rehearsal for the launch. On the 1MC set condition, 2 throughout the ship, spin-ups, tubes 1 through 24, and so on. And I've said this so many times, and Red Letter Media and other people have kind of got this too. You don't have to know what those terms mean. You just have to believe that the people who are saying those things know what those things mean. I happen to know what they mean in both of these cases. When I was watching Crimson Tide, and I heard the captain say on the 1MC, set condition 1 throughout the ship, spin up tubes 1 through 24, and I just thought, yeah, I know what all this means. This is freaking awesome. That's because the technical advisor on Crimson Tide was the former commander of the USS Alabama, and that gave it the feel of being real. And because it felt real, the whole movie, which is beautifully written, perfectly balanced, and stars 2 of the greatest actors ever, you now have, the stakes are high. That one scene accomplishes so much. First of all, it shows you that this is a real submarine and these are real people, and that this is like, oh, we got a bogey on our 6, sub commander. No. It makes it feel like this is a real nuclear weapons launch because they followed all of the procedures that you would actually follow on that. On Crimson Tide, there's a scene where they get the message. What is it? The extremely long frequency ELF system, where you can talk to subs underwater, but the radio waves are so long that the data rate's really low. But anyway, they get an emergency message, and then they have to decode it, and the 2 officers have to unlock the thing at the same time with their keys, and then the guy who's got the message, which is encased in a plastic thing, walks through the ship into the CIC, holding this thing up in the air, and I'm thinking, why is he holding it up in the air? Oh, he's holding it up in the air so that he can't switch it out. He's got to make it seen. Everybody's got to be able to see that he's got it. If he's a spy, he can't swap it out. That's why he's holding it up in the air. And if that hadn't been there, I wouldn't have missed it. This is the point I keep coming back to. If it hadn't been there, I wouldn't have missed it. But since it was there, I was 100% convinced. Yes, and Kirk's bamboo bazooka. And it's like, decode the message, and then the first guy says the message appears authentic, and then the executive officer says, I concur, and then the captain says, I concur, the message is authentic. It's a script, it's rote, it's absolutely rote. And that gives you the feel that you are on a real submarine. But as far as that particular movie goes, that one little scene does the most important thing in the movie, and that is this. It sets up whether or not the mutiny is justifiable. If you don't have that scene, there's no way to tell later when Denzel Washington's character launches this mutiny, there's no way to tell whether he's justified or not. It's so perfectly balanced that half of the crew thinks he is justified and the other half thinks it isn't. He gets a garbled message, and he's ready to launch because he's an old school guy and he's a cold warrior, and he's ready to launch, and he's prepared to launch and start World War III. We know these are real missiles. You can see from the look on the ship, and you can see everybody's, they're this is serious business. And then the exec comes back and says, sir, that is a message fragment. It's garbled. It's not complete. He says, it's an order to launch. He says, Skipper, it is not an order to launch. The parts of the message are missing. And then they get into an argument about whether to launch. And finally, the captain says, we're going to launch the goddamn missiles, and Denzel Washington. It's just so perfectly written, so perfectly acted. And Denzel Washington says, no, sir, I do not concur. You cannot launch without my agreement, and I do not give it. And it's like you're in violation of nuclear launch code protocols, and it all comes down to Cobb, who's the chief of the boat. And Cobb has to decide. The captain is saying arrest the first officer. The first officer is saying arrest the captain. The chief of the boat is the guy with the muscle. He's the guy who's running the security. Who's he going to go with? It's perfectly written so that it could go either way. And I think I was talking with Jeremy about this. It would have been interesting. It would have been interesting. You can't really write a movie this way because it would result in the end of the world. But it would have been very interesting to see the other side of that coin flip play off. In other words, it would have been certainly would have been an interesting DVD extra if it turned out that no, it was in fact a genuine launch command, that Denzel's mutiny caused the Russian rebels to launch nuclear missiles that struck the United States. And if the captain had acted according to his instinct, it would have nuked those Russians before they got their nukes off. And it turns out that World War III happened because Denzel was wrong. That would have been really cool. And it's not hard to see how that was. It's just it's my favorite movie as far as writing goes. And one of my all-time favorite films. And the casting is just so bloody good. Our buddy Viggo Mortensen has a pretty big role in that. I think he's the weapons officer on that ship. So anyway, so this guy who does this SAD thing put all of this jargon in there, and you don't have to know what it means. I think you can overdo it. I think that was probably a little bit overdone, at least in the beginning. But my point is, the audience doesn't have to know that if the MSWR goes hot, then the entire moon is going to be irradiated. They don't have to know that MSWR stands for molten salt water reactor. That's a dirty kind of a drive. And if they light that drive in the wrong position, if they don't use either a chemical rocket or a much lower intensity burn, if they go to a full burn in orbit around Ganymede, they're going to irradiate Ganymede. You don't need to know what an MSWR is, but if you do know what an MSWR is, it's really cool. And this is the point I'm trying to make. We didn't know what a warp drive was. We didn't know what a transporter was. We didn't know what a phaser was. We didn't know what the warp core was. We didn't know any of those things when Star Trek happened. We got to know them as time went on. And this kind of thing is just really wicked, wicked, wicked cool. Wicked cool. So that kind of briefing will give people the sense that it's not just like, oh, look, it's another random encounter with another alien ship, and we have to depend on our shields. And the reason that the writers use shields, and the reason they put shields in Star Trek, and the reason they put shields in Star Wars, and the reason they put shields in Star Citizen, is because it allows you to show damage to the ship without ending the battle. But I reject that concept. I reject it. I just say no. I think it's actually much more terrifying if you make it clear at the beginning, that if they hit you, it's over. It's done. There is no shields down to 37%. Sparks. They've invented the warp drive, but fuses have eluded them. And then, shields down to 6%. Dave Big Booty says, no shields, we die like real men. Exactly. How much more dramatic is it? And you see this sometimes in sub-combat. And if you've ever played a sub-sim, and I've played a lot of sub-sims, when you've got a guided torpedo on your tail and you're doing these hard turns in the water, trying to put a knuckle in the water where the sheer abruptness of the turn of the submarine creates a vortex in the water that blinds the torpedo's sonar for a minute. And this thing's just getting closer and closer and closer. You're dropping noisemakers, countermeasures, knuckle in the water, and the thing bites on the knuckle, and then it starts circling around again, and it's coming up. It's like, God, that is freaking terrifying, man. It is terrifying. And you can set things up so that you could take maybe one hit if it's unusual. Like, for example, let's say it took out your radiators or whatever, but you're essentially crippled after that. And anyway, I think that is far, far, far more interesting. I think it's much more interesting for these guys to be evaluating the combat. Quibo says, think of the audience, though. How does this idea bring in new members? Quibo, it brings it in the same way that anything brings in something new. It hasn't been seen before. No one has seen this before. It all depends on the writer. It's all about the writer. But people are going to be attracted to things that they've never seen. And Dave's Real Area 51 says, Star Trek's still cool, right? Well, it's not anymore, but I still watch original episodes. You watch Balance of Terror, which is, I think, the best Star Trek episode. I really do. You watch Balance of Terror, and yes, and I'm on board, right? Because that is a submarine, which is the Romulan ship, versus the Enterprise, which is a destroyer. That's just simple. It's just crystal clear. The submarine has a killer weapon, which is a torpedo. If you take a torpedo hit, it turns out on the Enterprise, they're in full reverse, running the hell away from this thing. They take one hit. If they get hit again, then they're done. But The submarine has the disadvantages. The Romulan ship has the disadvantages that a submarine has. It's cloaked. It can't fire while it's cloaked. It can't stay cloaked forever, and all of it is perfectly balanced. So if you've got guys in a CIC, the first condition in space combat is, do you want to fight? Because these things don't just appear out of anywhere. You know, if you've got military grade sensors, you can see enemy ships across the length of the solar system. So if you decide that you're going to fight, do you have the delta V to get to this guy if he doesn't want to fight? If he doesn't want to fight, chances are almost 100% that you're not going to have a fight. But if you've got the delta V to do the intercept, and he's got the delta V to accept the challenge, now you've got things like what's our maximum range of our longest range weapons, what's our kill weapons, what happens if we can get inside of this volume, all of this other stuff. And now you've got like all kinds of different calculations, but it's really, really hairy. And the best part about this is, if you commit to the fight, if you've got a naval vessel that has to stop this thing, and this thing has weapons, then you've made that decision and you've made the burn, and now you get to wait for 3 days. You know, these two little bubbles, which are the engagement rings, are getting closer and closer and closer, and you just get to sit there and wait. It's like knowing you're in the trenches in World War I, and you know that 3 days from now we're going over a top, big push, and or 3 weeks, and you're kind of hoping it gets called off, but no, it isn't. And just the suspense builds and builds and builds and builds, and you're running drills and you're running this and that. The guy did something that I had this idea independently. Certainly not saying he stole it from me. He deserves an enormous amount of credit for this. But one of the things that I decided early on and mentioned early on would be that AGI, not AI is going to be involved with everything, but AGI, the idea that there is a commander of the vessel that's smarter than humans are. My take on this is going to be that using AGI in battle is going to be the same thing as using nuclear weapons in battle. In other words, even 80 years after the fact, we still haven't done it. Because in the backstory for the colonies, there's going to be a bit of I think I'm going to call it the Great Dying or something like that, where AGI does get out of the box. And it's a big, 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 nasty situation. And yeah, M5 was supposed to be AGI, exactly. And so AGI, I think, will essentially be a box it's in a lockbox. It's a box. It's a physical box. And inside that box are the AGI, is the AGI. And the box has to be physically connected with connectors. There's no radio transmitter, no Bluetooth, nothing. It's not communicating with anything. It's just a box like a nuclear weapon. And to hook it up to the ship is the same thing as using tactical nuclear weapons. In other words, the release of AGI has to have the same weight of, okay, we're now going to escalate to nuclear weapons. We're going to go to tactical nuclear weapons now, which has never happened. And this solves the entire AI problem, the AGI problem completely. Does AGI exist? Well, it does exist. Yes, there are AGIs that are much, much smarter than humans. And we lock them away in boxes because the technology is so destructive that it is a weapon of last resort, and it is also a strategic deterrent. In other words, we'll do battle with China out there in the colonies, and we'll deal with all of these things. And in the Cold War, we'll fight proxy wars and lose 57,000 men in Vietnam to the Russians and so on. But we will not go nuclear, because to let that genie out of the box is to go into there's no win there. So AGI exists, and every warship has got a box. It's got an AGI box, and that is to be used as a last resort when you get command authority from the national command structure and all of this other stuff, which is cool because you're never going to use it. You might use it out in the middle of nowhere as a episode device, maybe even a season device. Like somebody has unleashed their AGI, and now everybody has to stop this thing because this thing is smarter than we are, and you got to stop the proliferation. But he used a term that was, and if you blink, you miss it. but he said we're going to keep malice on the leash for this one. And malice stands for, multiple attack, blah, 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 blah. He's talking, I'm virtually positive, he's talking about an AGI. He's basically saying we're going to keep our ultimate weapon on the leash. We're not going to use it for this, because if we use it, they'll know. And if they know, they'll radio that it's being used, and then you've just popped a tactical nuke over, Kursk. Roadrunner says, can't you just disconnect the AGI connector? Well, the problem, Roadrunner, is once you connect it to the ship's systems, then it's got a hold of the ship's memory systems, got a hold of the ship's communication systems. It can start communicating itself to other locations where it can basically escape. So it's got to be built into a box in the equivalent of an absolute top level biolab, where the room is just an electronic black box. There's no radio signals in or out. There's nothing in there. Air Techie says it'll fight to survive. It'll fight to survive, and it's the lab director, and you're the chimp. It will find a way. It's only through backstory that happened, back at the 21st century, where we just somehow managed to contain these things. And so now, it's like, again, it's a historical analogy. AGI got out. It caused enormous damage. We managed to put it back in the bottle. There is a proliferation agreement about AGI, all the rest of this stuff. And we managed to keep it contained. Everybody's got it, but nobody uses it. It's just cool. It's just really, really, really cool. And that decision is a decision that you would make, When does the captain, for example, let's say you've got a boomer, you've got a ballistic missile sub, and it's on station, and it knows it's been detected, and the situation is very hot, and it's hovering at launch depth, and it detects. AGI is artificial general intelligence. It's self-aware AI. So you got a boomer, and it's at hovering depth. It's got its doors open. Okay? Let's say it's a Chinese boomer, hover depth, doors open, ready to launch. And you are the commander of a U.S. attack sub, and you are 200 yards, 300 yards, 400 yards maybe, behind the boomer in its baffles, although since it's not moving, you're just both hovering there. And you've got your doors open too. So it's a Taiwan Strait crisis. Got a Chinese boomer with the doors open, ready to launch. You've got a U.S. attack sub within easy kill range, no escape for the boomer. All the 4 torpedo doors are open, and you're ready to launch. So now what? Neither side can act until they get the word from their HQ. But they may not have time to get their HQ. So if I'm the American attack sub skipper, I'm saying to myself, I'm holding fire until I hear them pressurizing the launch tubes. In other words, they are now preparing to fire. If I hear that they are pressurizing the launch tube, something that's irreversible, they're going to eat 4 fish before those missiles go off. And likewise, what does the Chinese commander do? He knows he's got an American attack sub back there. If he hears torpedoes in the water, does he launch? These are really interesting questions, and they just come with a huge box of drama attached to them. And Tom Gerlach says it could have slang for the box called holding it in the bottle. That's great. Yeah, bottle sounds a little more high tech. It's great. It's in a bottle, and you don't let it out of the bottle. Because it's a genie and it'll destroy it. But everybody's got one because you have to. You have to be prepared that the enemy has it, and if he uses it, you've got to have one. So there you go. But that briefing really sounded great to me. And so the question is this going to get new viewers? And I think the answer is yes, for 2 reasons. First of all, it's new. The Expanse didn't do this. everybody talked about how realistic the Expanse was and all that other stuff, and certainly it was more realistic some stuff. But the Expanse had these guys just turning on a dime and burning and all the rest of that stuff, you know. And they had, you know, I don't see missiles as being a particularly big threat in an era where you have high energy lasers that can just simply kill them. I don't know how missiles get through that. But in any event, you know, you've got your various weapons. No one's ever seen it before. It's not action, it's tension. And eventually you get action. But it's tension. And by the way, escape pods, come on. You know, there are no escape pods on a submarine because the environment around the escape pod, around the submarine, is such that it's pointless. I suppose technically you could say they have the whatever they call those devices, those lungs to escape a sunken submarine. But in terms of combat, if you're below 200, 300 feet, it's over, and it's instantly over. And what I'm trying to, Dave's Reels Area 51 says, hopefully it'll get the kids into competence and excellence. You can't be a screw up in space. So one reason I think it's going to appeal to young people is because it's new. But the second reason I think it's going to appeal to young people is what you just saw sounds exactly like the kind of thing you hear in most computer games today, like Call of Duty and Arma and Ace Combat, all of these things. They're used to getting briefings like this. They know what they sound like, and I think it's just going to completely grab them. And if somebody doesn't know what an MSWR is, that's fine. They're going to want to know, and then we'll do that. So I think build it and they will come, man. And I'm not going to make it for other people and make it for myself, but no one ever saw anything like Star Trek before, and that's why the Enterprise design was so important, because Roddenberry specifically said, was it Matt Jeffries who designed the Enterprise? He specifically said, I want this thing to look like nothing that's ever been put on the screen before. I don't want it to look like a rocket, and I don't want it to look like a flying saucer. So he took a flying saucer, bolted 2 rockets onto the back of it, put a secondary hull there, and now you've got the most iconic ship design in history. So anyway, I just feel really excited about all these things. And one last thing, I was Pat Karen. I'm glad you brought this up because this happens to be something I'm kind of an expert on. Pat Karen says, wouldn't that be one of the more terrible ways to go in a crippled sub sinking into deep water? We know what it would be like. It happened to a number of Russian subs, and it happened to American subs, to two American subs, Thresher and Scorpion. In both of those cases, what happened was those subs started sinking, and when they started sinking, they didn't just pop leaks. It wasn't like in the World War II movies where as you get deeper and deeper, because deeper and deeper was 200 feet, 300 feet. These guys are down 600, 700, 800 feet, and what happens is the crew knows they're going to die because they're sinking. But when implosion happens, it happens in 0.13 seconds, tenth of a second. It's faster than your nervous system can react. Not only do they not feel any pain, they literally do not know what happens. You're here and then over. Ocean Gate, same thing. 0.1 seconds, tenth of a second, and it's over. When the Scorpion collapsed at crush depth, the back of the sub, it had a tapered end. The pressure from the water compressed the telescoped the back of the sub into the main body, and they said that that when that collision happened, the entire back of the sub, including the propeller shaft, stayed in place. The rest of the bulkheads compressed into the main hull, and they said it was moving at 2,000 miles an hour. That's how fast that compression happened. You think that they get crushed to death, but they don't. They're actually just flash incinerated. The air gets compressed so quickly that the air temperature turns to several thousand degrees. You just simply vaporize, and then you dissipate. people have been mentioning the Kursk, but the Kursk didn't reach crush depth. Kursk was in shallow enough water so that it sank and then ended up on the ocean floor. But if you sink in the deep ocean, it's horrifying, but as far as actual death goes, it's probably the most merciful death on the planet. On the planet. You're here and simply you're not. Just like that. So and I was thinking about one of the things. I was talking to Grok about this. I was looking at the thing that the guy did, and this thing is set in the 21st century, our century. It's all inside the solar system. And our ships are going to be a little more advanced looking than that, but I've always disliked having huge radiators. I just think they're ugly. The problem is a serious one because when you have a nuclear vessel, you're generating a lot of waste heat. So I basically was talking with Grok, and I said, let's say you give yourself another 200 years of engineering, 150, 200 years of engineering. What can we do about dissipating heat? Well, first of all, you can get a lot more efficient with the waste heat. That's one thing. So that you can use smaller radiators than what we see today. I mean, that makes sense. But I said, Darth Chuck the Merciless beat me to it, but I said, yeah, okay, but what about, what are some of the extremes? I said, couldn't you build a heat sink into the ship? I mean, couldn't you just have like a gigantic tank of water and just heat the water and then dissipate the energy or recover the energy like recombinant braking does, where the energy that's created by the brakes being applied is actually charging the generator. That's helping slow you down, then you just get the energy back, so on. And we started talking about things, and actually the great thing about Grok and these AIs is that it's really cool when you get into this thing. But one of the things you could do is you could carry a certain volume of liquid tin, of all things, and as you burn energy, if you want to keep your signature down or whatever, you're increasing your energy debt. You're just heating this tin, and the tin absorbs the energy, and it gets hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. And you can carry the tin around for pretty much as long as you want to, so long as you don't exceed the carrying capacity of the tin. Now, there's another material that he told me about. I forget what it is. It's liquid sodium or liquid lithium or something. It's got a much higher ability to store energy. But here's what's really, really cool. So let's say you got a space combat situation, and you got these big red hot radiators, which are just a giant flashlight. It's not like you don't know where they are, but you don't want to make things easy for the guy. So you're burning a lot of delta V, which means you've got your reactor and your thrust is working really hard. Air Techie says eventually you have to dump the heat you do. But let's say that you're carrying all this heat and you're building up heat, you're doing all these evasive maneuvers, and you're really, really in trouble. It's sodium? Okay. And you're really in trouble. And this is now a last-ditch thing, right? You have radiators, but they're stowed. The idea is you're going to go through this combat, you're going to survive the combat, and then over time you'll put your radiators out and you'll slowly bleed the heat out of this liquid sodium, whatever the case may be, right? But in the case, I said to Grok, but in the case of an emergency, if you ditch the heat, if you just ejected these heat sinks, they're going to take the heat with it, right? Yes. I said, so if you eject these heat sinks and then you explode them, what happens? Well, you get an enormous thermal flare. You get an enormous radar flare because you've got molten tin or molten sodium. And in the case of sodium, you get an X-ray blast as well or something. So basically what you could do is a last-ditch effort. If you were really in trouble, it looked like you were going to get cooked, you got these missiles, or something's tracking, whatever the case may be. You dump your heat and you blow it up. You blew it up and you create this gigantic flare that blinds the sensor. Well, again, Air Tech beat me. Blinds the sensors on the attacking ship. It can't see through the heat. It can't see through the metal beads of molten tin or molten sodium. It gets a huge, chaff cloud, all of this stuff. Air Techie says you still have to deal with the heat that you're generating. Yeah, then you put out the radiators, or you melt the ship, or you stop burning, and so on. It's a last-ditch effort, but it's spectacular, and you don't want to overuse it. That is a once or twice in a lifetime of, of 8 seasons, you might do this twice in 8 seasons. But the first time you do it, man, if you're really going to do a cliffhanger at the end of a season, and you got a space combat thing going on, and the good guys are in deep pudding, this is a really visually cool, that is scientifically consistent thing to do. So the idea would be, look, man, these guys are closing on us or whatever. They're getting inside. We've got a short range, powerful kill weapon, but these guys are pounding us at long range, and they're getting closer, and we're taking all these hits, and we build up all this energy and so on, and we set up a burn towards these guys, and you pop this thing out there. Then you change your vector. These 2 tanks of sodium are going towards the enemy ship. You change your vector. You launch your last-ditch missile. You just change your delta V, change your vector. You pop these things before you do that, and it blinds them long enough for this missile to get through, whatever the case may be, right? You get the idea. We'll work on it with experts. People says, would there be war in that kind of space travel? What's interesting, kind of, as I talked about nuclear before, but nuclear weapons, I think, are commonplace. In fact, there's no question that every weapon, any missile or anything like that in the colonies, of course it's a nuclear weapon. Of course it is. Nuclear weapons in space are not off limits. On the contrary, they're everywhere. It's the AI that's the threat. So if you detonate a nuclear weapon in space, you don't get the blast wave. You do get a thermal pulse. You got to get pretty close, because the thermal pulse dissipates at the square of the distance. But if you land one, you're not going to put a chemical explosion on this thing. The other alternative is a kinetic kill device, where, again, you don't have an exploding warhead. You just take a hockey puck and accelerate it to 10% of the speed of light or something like that, down a spinal mount on a rail. And if you hit the thing, whatever it touches is just going to disintegrate because of the kinetic energy. And I think you'd be firing a bunch of those. Boom, 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 boom. You'd just be sending them out there. The problem with the railgun is that no matter, realistically, you can only get those projectiles up to a certain percentage of the speed of light. Relatively low percentage of the speed of light, which means they're slow. If they hit, they're fatal, but they're slow compared to an energy weapon, which is instantaneous in terms of the speed of light. So if it's slow, you have time to evade it, and that means you got to get close, because if you got to get close enough so that the enemy ship cannot evade your incoming hockey pucks from a railgun. Airteki says you need to have an almost direct hit for a nuke for it to be guaranteed kill. Range varies with the energy of the package. But Airteki, couldn't you put together couldn't you do a neutron weapon or something where the entire purpose is just to kill the crew, just irradiate the crew? You're not going to worry about the heat flash, or you're not going to worry about there's not going to be a blast effect. You just want to get it close enough to irradiate the crew so that they all are pretty much immediately incapacitated and die within, an hour, something like that. Same physics? Well, we'll figure it out. Point is, we've got a lot of smart people on this side, and I want to make more engineers. I want to make more engineers, and I want to make more pilots, and I want to make more people want to go into the military, and they're not going to do it by watching Star Trek Discovery. So that's the end of that rant. Let me see, just a couple of chats. We'll do the questions here. That was fun. Carl Reinecke, Super Chat says, been deep diving World War II history and amazed at how old Mark Mishner and Bill Halsey looked at 60. By today's standards, they look 80 or 90. They do. And same for Chester Nimitz and all those guys. But Halsey had a skin condition. I actually feel sorry for Halsey. I don't think he was Halsey was not a great, in fact, he was very impetuous actual commander. Halsey's benefit was that he had exactly the right attitude we needed at the beginning of the war. He was bombastic. He was confident. We're gonna, he pulls the Enterprise into Pearl Harbor, I think, on December 8th or 9th, right after the attack, a day or two after the attack. And he's steaming the Enterprise into Pearl Harbor. Enterprise was supposed to be in Pearl Harbor during the attack, but she got delayed for weather, so she missed the attack and she survived. And he's on the flying deck, or the bridge of the wing deck, the wing of the bridge deck rather, and he's leaning against the rail, and I think she was coming in at night or something, but Enterprise is just gliding into Pearl Harbor, and there's nothing but burning battleships and bodies in the water, and just absolute destruction. And Halsey turns to his guy next to him, is probably his executive officer or something. He says, when we're finished with these people, the Japanese language will only be spoken in hell. That's Halsey. Halsey at his command, when he went to, was it Operation Watchtower? When he was kind of in the rear setting up the Guadalcanal campaign, he had a billboard up outside of his base, and the billboard said, "Kill Japs, kill Japs, kill more Japs." Signed, Bill Halsey. So he kept morale up, but he missed Midway, because he had a incredible, was it eczema? He had a skin condition. And for Halsey to have to sit out the greatest naval victory in the history of the United States, arguably in the history of the world, to have to sit that one out, man, that must have been just living hell for Halsey. But yeah, Michener, these guys look ancient. Well, they're steely-eyed sailormen. So and they're out there in the elements and stuff. And let's see, we're looking for super chats here. Timeline Junkie. I don't remember that name. Bill, I can't tell you how cool it is to get to watch your work the stuff out and see you create it in real time. You're building something big. Thank you. I really needed that. I really feel like we are together. And I got a really smart audience, and I want to get everybody involved as much as possible. And I want to appeal to smart people. And the way you get more smart people is to create something that you watch when you're young and make you decide, man, I want to be a part of that. There's no end to the number of people that James Doohan, over the course of his lifetime after the original series, hundreds of people, real people, came up to him at conventions and so on and said, "I became an engineer because of you." Hundreds of people, and I'm sure McCoy heard some of the same things. And the good that Nichelle Nichols did for not just black women but for black people in general. Like, calm, competent, best in the fleet, certainly capable of taking care of themselves. I never saw Uhura throw a 200-pound man over her shoulders, but I did see her pull a knife on a guy once or twice, and that woman was unbelievably feminine, and she kicked ass. She just didn't have to punch guys in the face, So, so there's that. I think those are the super chats. I think we got them. Yeah, I would like to have seen the Montana too, very much. That was the class of ships after the Iowa class, and instead of 3 turrets, it had 4. And I think the Iowa would have eaten the Yamato for breakfast. I think Iowa would have had it for breakfast. Just stay out at maximum range. Use your unbelievably advanced radar-based targeting, and yes, the Yamato had somewhat larger caliber guns, but I think we had better shells, and I think Iowa versus Yamato 1-on-1, I think Iowa would have just eaten her alive. But if you get a lucky hit and you get a long-range penetrating shot and you hit a magazine, well, that's too bad. But I actually think the Iowa was a much better ship, and those 5-inch guns, man, that they put on the destroyers, on the Fletcher, they had had 5 turrets on a Fletcher class, and then they later went to double gun turrets. That 5-inch gun, which was the secondary batteries on the Iowa, that was an amazing weapon. I think we're still using a variant of it today on our Arleigh Burke classes. Just a tremendous gun. Okay, let's get to our questions. Why don't we? I'm going to have to make this one quick tonight. Yes, the Yamato had 18-inch guns, and I think the Iowa had 16-inch guns. But it doesn't matter if you have 400-inch guns if you can't hit their target. and the Japanese relied on optical range finding. It was a particular irony of the war that the Americans thought that the Japanese were these nearsighted, little yellow devils with their little slanty eyes, but the Japanese trained their gunners and their gunnery directors and trained them at night, and they were at nighttime. They were until American radar got on board, which actually happened relatively early. By the end of the Guadalcanal campaign, was it Alaska or the Washington? Maybe both of them had radar guided guns, but in the Battle of Savo Island, the Japanese just ate us for breakfast. It was the worst defeat we suffered. 4 cruisers, 5 cruisers, a couple destroyers for the loss of maybe a Japanese destroyer. It was a catastrophe. I fought that scenario knowing what was going to happen, and I beat the Japanese on that, but it was a close call. And I just knew what they were bringing, and I knew what I had. Yeah, Savo Island was a freaking disaster. And we've got to have a Savo Island in the colonies. When we finally get to the point where we have a shooting war, it's got to start with a catastrophe. If you're going to win a war, you have to lose the first battle, and you have to lose it big. That's what seems to be the case. It was the case with the war against Carthage. It was the case in the Civil War at Bull Run. It was the case in World War II at Pearl Harbor. It was the case in 9/11 and War on Terror. The guys that lose the first battle big usually win the war because they're angry and filled with a terrible resolve. Yeah, and I like the idea that a lot of the blame for Savo Island fell on the U.S. commander, and he apparently deserved a significant amount of it. He took his flagship at Chicago, I think it was, kind of sailed it out of the way of the battle. Now, some people have defended him and saying he was doing the right thing, but it was badly handled, and genuinely sadly, when that commander was relieved, he was rotated to some training thing someplace, and did that job competently, and he just got dressed one day and he just blew his brains out. That's really tragic, and it's also really interesting, and it's got all those great elements of a memorable drama where you can see both sides of the story, and part of you thinks, well, he deserved it because he screwed up so bad. Then another part of you thinks nobody deserves that kind of. Yeah. Anyway, I've forgotten his name now, but it was not a happy ending for him. All right, let's see what we got. Like I said, I may have to cut this one quite short tonight. Logan Darklighter with a super chat says, I recommend a video by the Fat Electrician on Willis Ching Lee, who introduced the entire concept of radar to aim battleship guns with. Yeah, radar was completely untested at the time. We originally had those sets that just had a oscilloscope with a straight line, and there'd be a spike, where there was a return. But we really quickly went to this more advanced radar system, which had the classic, rotating scan line that gave you a much better situational awareness, and it gave you a much better sense of range and closure and the battle space and all that stuff. And at the Battle of Suriago Strait, the Japanese sent a couple of obsolete battleships and a cruiser and a bunch of destroyers kind of on an end run around the Leyte landing, and it was a sacrificial. It was a feint, and they knew they were going to sacrifice those ships. But it was the last battleship versus battleship battle in history at nighttime. It was really funny because as they penetrated the U.S. Line, the further they went, the more the bigger the ships they got. First, they got attacked by torpedo boats. PT boats did almost nothing. Then the destroyers went at them, and the destroyers got some hits, but the destroyers also took hits. Then they got to the cruiser line of the Americans, and finally they got to the battleship line of the Americans, and they blew Fuso and Yamashiro out of the water. Just blew them away. And the cruisers was Mogami, maybe, I think that went down too, and all of that. All right, so again, I'm sorry I went long, but I have I'm going to have to punt on virtually all of these tonight, and we'll just load them next time, and I'll just jump in them earlier. I thought I was going to jump into this early tonight, but I've been talking for 2 hours, so sincere apologies for this. Bring them back next Monday, and I'll just jump into them. Okay, so I'm just going to do a couple from the. I'm just going to do a couple that I like, and again, my apologies, please. I'll take this one from Roadrunner. Greetings, friend Bill. After Jacob Belcheck's question last week about the clip switching every 5 seconds in a bumpy ride home, and your answer that the cuts were made to match the timing of the music, I went back and watched the videos again with that in mind. It wasn't until that moment that I realized how important the music was to enhancing the impact of the video on the audience. Full disclosure, I'm a retired electronics tech with zero creativity. Well, I've got enough to get that anyway. I'm sure that there was a connection in the back of my mind, but it wasn't until I actually paid attention to the pace of the music and the timing of the scene changes that I appreciated the effect the background music has on increasing the intensity of the scene. I could feel the tension rising as the music volume subtly increased with each view change. I'm sure all of the truly creative members are sitting back saying, duh, hello Marusha, hi Eric. But for us creativity impaired viewers, this realization had a definite impact on my appreciation of a well-made artistic endeavor. So the question, during the creative process, when do you select the music? At the very beginning, tailoring the scene to match the music, after the video elements have been rendered, trying to find music to match the video simultaneously, and so on. So in this case, and generally speaking, I create the elements for the scene, the actual pieces. In this case, I rendered, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 different crews going through turbulence. And of all the times I've ever used AI, that was the time it was just dialed in. Every time I hit the button, it was a keeper. So I rendered hundreds of still images, and I took the ones that I thought had the most character and were the most different from each other. And I like the idea that some of them were really, really modern and some of them were really, really old-looking vehicles. But mostly I was looking for differences in the crew faces. So once I had that, I animated them. It was a pretty easy thing to animate. I just said the pilots look at each other. They're concerned, but not afraid. They're checking their instruments, and they're occasionally glancing at each other, and that gave me back all this stuff that was great. And then what I did was I had to go back and do a second pass on this because I figured out I could do reversals looking out through the windows forward. And then I did a number of still renders and then animated those where I said the spaceship is in low orbit, the ship is in the absolute upper stratosphere, the ship is at the top of the cloud deck, the ship is in the clouds, the ship is below the clouds, and the ship is right across the ground. And that gave me different reversals. And so if you watch that again with an eye to that, the reason the thing actually has a feel to it, unlike the very first version I did, which is just random collections. The second version, which is the one that we've been showing, feels like a story, even though there's no narrative thread to it, because it starts out in space. First shots are in the blackest space. Then there's shots of the limb of the Earth, and they're rotating. It's clear that they're weightless, and then they're kind of in the atmosphere, and then you can see there are storms down there, and then there's a cloud deck, and some of the clouds are above them. Then they're actually flying through the clouds. Then they're below the clouds, and you can see the landscape. So once I had that, I picked the piece of music, laid it down, and then I dropped the scenes in more or less in order of them descending. I mixed them up so that I didn't run too many of the two things same together back to back. And most of those animations were 6, 7, 8 second animations, and each one of the music beats was about 4 seconds. So I took the best 4 seconds out of that total 8-second thing, dropped those babies in, did a final look at it, rearranged one or two things, and got something. I was telling Natasha this. It's such a strange thing to say, but it's just true. It's not only not the best work I've ever done in my life, it's not even in the top 10 in terms of the most important work I've ever done in my life, but I'm telling you from the bottom of my heart that A Bumpy Ride Home is the favorite thing that I have ever done in my life. I like that better than anything I've ever done. I can't believe that I was able to do that. that so encapsulated everything that I had in mind in terms of the look and the feel. I adore that clip. I just absolutely adore it. The next challenge, and I've just finished the work I've been doing on this documentary. I delivered everything on the last of the redos. We had to redo a bunch of shots. I've delivered those on Sunday. So that is off my plate. The next thing to do for the colonies is to combine the coolness of A Bumpy Ride Home with the storytelling of what did I call it? Say his name and he appears or whatever. Oh, Speak of the Devil. The Speak of the Devil thing was garbage dialogue. I was writing it on the fly, but I wanted to see if I could make something look like a movie where they were both in the same lighting, same background. And I thought Speak of the Devil, on that level only, worked rather well. It's crummy dialogue, and it's not about anything, but it felt like a movie. So I think the next thing I'm going to work on is a scene where the family, Jake and Lisa and Will and Claire, enter a shuttle, orbit-to-ground vehicle, winged orbit-to-ground vehicle. You see them in zero-G floating back to their seats, and then there's, 30 or 40 other passengers in this thing, and they're floating to their seats. Meanwhile, you got the guys in the cockpit, and they're doing a couple of their pre-flight checks. They push off from the station, and then they basically go down and land on Niflheim. And this one will not be rhythmically timed, and it will not be a collection of shots. This one will be a story that is going to be a relatively short story that's going to mostly focus on the pilots, but going to have a lot of shots in the back cabin where the whole family is looking out the window and talking in the turbulence and have other passengers on board. That is a level up in complexity from anything we've done before, but it still keeps the cool stuff. The one thing I've been dealing with lately is that I've got to get back into Blender because the exteriors cannot be done in AI as it exists now. Not even close. I've never ever seen an exterior shot of a spaceship or anything in AI that convinced me at all. It's real good with interiors and it's phenomenal with faces. So there's that. I'm going to do two more and I'm going to call it a night. But please bring them back and we'll do them again here. All right. Capital G Geek. Greetings from the swamps of Northern Virginia. You have a legitimate disdain for movie tropes like the extra dark lighting on spaceships. How do you balance the tropes with the movie shorthand? For example, blue light is shorthand for cold or night, empty chairs meaning absent people, someone watching a car drive off means they conduct extensive surveillance before breaking in, etc. If you want a good take on the Chinese colonies, you really should look into the Kowloon walled city. Yes, I am very familiar with it, and that is exactly the kind of thing it's a human hive. If you're not familiar with it, it was 6.5 acres in Hong Kong that was technically owned by the British but wasn't really controlled or administered by anyone. It was torn down in the mid-90s. I remember hearing it was torn down. I was kind of sad that it was torn down because I thought it was so interesting. Have you watched K-pop Demon Hunters or Primitive War yet? No, I haven't. The Kowloon walled city looked like it was like a maybe 4-block by 4-block area that was just nothing but structure. And inside of it were warrens, that's the only word for them, just warrens and pathways. There were tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people living in this cube. It had its own restaurants. You've got an open space in the hallway where you're cooking something on a kebab and just a human hive. And it was horrible. And that's how I'm gonna play the Chinese, and I'm gonna play them that way because they've earned it. My throat wrinkles are reptile-like. That's true. I wish I could do something about them, but I can't. So maybe I'll have a color thing come out. I'll get some kind of prosthetic or something. The Chinese welded people into their buildings during COVID, and if you don't know the term tofu dreg, virtually everything that is constructed in China is of astonishingly poor quality. That is a regime that doesn't give a damn about its people. Now, you can argue, and we can argue whether or not China is going to be a power in the future, but I'm not going to. I really can't play that game. You're trying to make a reflection on today, and that is, what you got to work with. Samuel B7 B7E says, "You know who I am." I don't, actually. Yeah. So as far as getting rid of the tropes goes, yes, you can. Cool blue lighting works in Victorian period pieces. It works in science fiction. It works in cop dramas. All of those things are just fundamental tools. The tropes are things like people living in steel structures with no lights and flashing yellow lights and steam coming out of everywhere. That's the trope. I really love the idea of having one of these guys walk into one of these structures and saying, "Can we get some lights in here, please? Can somebody please just turn on the lights?" And you do. "Oh, I will know. I will know who you are." Wow, Samuel B. You are quite a raconteur. Suno Feast. I'm guessing he's an AI animator. Well, we will see. Not off to a great start, I'll tell you. But I'm looking forward to seeing what you got. I'm going to do one more here. George Freeland. We know the colony setting doesn't have alien civilizations, or none that are reachable, but to what extent do people in this universe know this to be a fact? Might there be factions, perhaps an element within the NACAD government with irrational ideas about our place in the galactic neighborhood? I saw something by Anton. Is it Anton Petrov? Who has that astronomy? Is that his name? You know the guy, right? He's got an astronomy channel. He's terrific. I love the guy. Hello, wonderful person guy. He's fantastic. Roger Ramjet says there's a current Hong Kong high-rise fire that has 151 casualties and counting. Wow. So Anton had something a little while ago that was really interesting, and he said it basically said there are no aliens, and his argument had nothing to do whatsoever with the habitability of alien planets. Had nothing to do with that. He looked at the likelihood of intelligence, technological intelligence, and what had to happen evolutionarily in order for this to happen. And when you stack these things up, it turns out that the likelihood of evolution having to clear these bars in the order that they have to happen exceeds the lifespan of a solar system by an order of 100. It basically says, the math says that intelligent life is essentially impossible, and that the anthropic principle says that, well, if it happened anywhere through the fluke of whatever, then those people would say, well, we guess this is the way life is everywhere. But the math says no. It's not a question of, gee, there aren't enough Earth-like or habitable planets. I maintain from the beginning that just the presence of the moon is so unlikely. What the moon did for the Earth is 1 in a billion, maybe 1 in a trillion. But even then, you have to add all of these hurdles that evolution has to clear, and that there's a time scale for these things, and that when you add these time scales, it just doesn't add up. If you go to Anton, I don't know what his channel's called. Hang on, let me find it. It's a great astronomy channel. He's really cool. It's called Anton Petrov. He's a great guy. Let's see if I can find the Trinity Water says the Drake equation is BS. It is absolutely BS. It's the biggest BS because it is a list of, what is it? Is it 8 or 9 variables? And none of the variables are known. It's like the problem with significant figures. You can have an equation that has 9 variables, and you could know every one of those variables to 10 orders of magnitude or 10 significant figures. And then if you have one of those variables that is completely unknown, then the entire equation is just plain garbage. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let me see. Videos tech. 4 days ago. And he puts out something every day. This guy is a freaking workhorse. Math suggests we may be the only intelligent life in the universe. Here, let me. Come on. I'll put the link. It's a really fascinating video, and I need to watch it again on a second pass so I can really get a sense of exactly what he's talking about, so I can be a little more succinct when I talk about these things. So here you go. If it turns out, and this is, look, things change, but if it turns out that this is in fact the case, that intelligence is so exceedingly unlikely that, listen, given the size of the universe, if it happened once, it's probably happened a couple more times. But if that is the case, then that defeats all of the kind of eco arguments. Like, how can you do this? How can you do this and anyway, you get the idea. Listen, I got to bounce. And I have to bounce because Natasha's gone on a little trip, and she's checked into a hotel, and I need to make sure that everything's okay. And she'll be back in a couple days, but I just want to make sure everything's bolted down. So, all right, so sorry about the abrupt ending. Please bring those questions back next week. I promise I'll get into them much earlier. Sorry if I kept you on hold for the questions this week, but it was sure a fun episode, and learned a lot, and hopefully you had some fun. So that'll do it. The show's made possible, as you know by now, by the members at BillWhittle.com who have kept us going through thick and thin, and hopefully we'll be getting a little more into the thick as we continue, but we're very grateful for them for all of that. And so we will see you on Thursday night for your very own Stratosphere Lounge. Thursday, yes. Okay, bye.